There we go. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this second part of the VMware in Healthcare webinar series. We're excited that you can join us today. Today's session is all about best practice with migration. So once you've embarked on your transformation journey, we're going to give you as many tips as we can in the next hour on how to be successful so that your initiative delivers some great outcomes for your clinicians. My name is Will Dallins-Jones. I'm part of the architecture team here at VMware, aligned to end user computing. I'm joined again in the room in 3D by Barbara McKenzie, who's our healthcare advisor, and Farid Agahi, who's our EUC healthcare strategist based out of the US. So thanks again both for joining us. Quick bit of housekeeping. Again, same as last week. So the session is being recorded. You will get a recording link as a follow-up. We're in webinar format, so please ask questions in the Q&A panel. We're going to have even more of a discussion today, very much a sort of fireside chat kind of idea. So we welcome your questions. Please put them in the Q&A because then we can follow up if we don't quite have time to discuss them. So last week, or in part one, it was really around the strategy and the vision. So we tried to talk about many of the trends we're seeing from across both the Australia, New Zealand region as well as the US, and things that you need to be considering as part of your vision setting around modernizing your end user computing operations. Today is about, once you embark on that journey, what are the things you need to be thinking about? So we'll start off with some planning decisions and some key questions that we're getting regularly from customers across the region. And then the second half, we'll talk about those best practices and lessons learned. So what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing to make sure that you are successful going along that journey. Where we finished up last week was around the digital clinical workspace. So this is the idea that you need a platform in place to help you deliver any of the use cases that are thrown at you by your organization through to some of the requirements that are coming, say, from the EMR vendors. And ultimately, there's a number of different tenets here. So the first being the idea that we mobilize Windows, so the desktops and the applications, that follow me desktop or always on point of care concept has been around for a very long time, but extending that into mobile workflows. So, applications that sit on these, mobile devices that are actually coming through via the EMR vendors, maybe extending those devices to patient engagement devices. Ultimately, as all of that application landscape changes, being able to curate the experience, curate those apps through a single digital front door, so it's nice and easy for your clinicians to get in and access what they need whenever they need it. Bolted onto that, or not bolted on, actually baked in throughout the platform, a zero trust architecture to make sure whilst the access is very easy, as long as you're all trusted, we're protecting you at every step of the way through a very comprehensive, as I say, zero trust architecture. Across the top, making sure that we are managing any of those devices in a very efficient way, decoupled from your network, and measuring and acting upon user experience telemetry so that you can you can move from a reactive service to a proactive service. Ultimately, again, helping your clinicians get their jobs done and deliver great patient care. But today, we've got loads of content. We are just going to focus on the Follow Me desktop and that virtualization stack. We were discussing, we probably need a part 3 because there's plenty we can be discussing around the mobile flows and perhaps modern management and then the rest. But yeah, today we're going to talk about the virtualization stack. And again, as a reminder, the reasons customers use Horizon in healthcare are things like that integrated stack, the tight integration to things like vSphere and the instant clone technology to help you with, having this, very, rapid ability to scale, very, security built in, and then having the tools in the kit bag to help you cope with all of those different use cases. So things like Dynamic Environment Manager, allowing you to provide different configurations, apps on demand, all these different components, allowing you to have a single platform that gives you the scale, the resiliency, the security, but delivering the different use cases with a great experience. If you want more information on that and you weren't with us in part 1, please go and review the recording and there was more of a discussion around that. So without further ado, that's plenty of me talking. Let's talk about some common planning questions. So as I say, we're only going to cover 4. They're quite high level, and we could actually spend an hour on each, really. So we're going to go fairly quick fire, but they are common things that are being fed back from our customers. So this is, we want VDI or the Follow Me desktop, but our senior leaders are asking about things like the business case. So Farid, I might pass to you to start us off. How do you approach the business case over there? You talked last week about having a lot of customers, obviously using Horizon already, and you're working with many that are going along this journey now. Yeah, what's your process? What's their process?
Thanks, Bill. So the notion of a business case kind of revolves around really a combination of hard savings as well as additional value propositions. In other words, capabilities that cannot be delivered using traditional kind of physical, Windows device type of estate. But our experience is that the business case fundamentally has to make financial sense, and as such, it needs to be inclusive of all of the cost factors associated with traditional end user computing services, right? In a kind of a traditional environment, you would have a Windows estate, thousands of Windows endpoints. They consume resources, they have software on them. From an operational perspective, there's obviously a well-practiced kind of set of services, and then the business case has to incorporate the saves that come from effectively changing that paradigm into a more of a centralized delivery of Windows paradigm, right? And that pivot comes with a combination of measurable operational efficiencies, right, in terms of how much staff and how many resources are needed to manage the environment, as well as all the downstream capabilities such as patch management, call center, call resolution, all of those KPIs that effectively are quantifiable for an organization. And the main thing that I would recommend is to make sure that the business case is not solely focused on essentially a backend infrastructure that delivers VDI, right? It is effectively that plus all the saves that come from that paradigm shift. And when done right, our experience shows that that equation is worst case neutral. That means for the same for the same economic model, you could deliver a virtual desktop service and yet deliver a significant amount of additional functionality over and beyond that. Now, in certain scenarios, we actually find that it's not only cost neutral, it's actually cost positive, meaning cost negative, I guess, that however you want to look at it, but it's the ROI is a positive ROI. But really the main takeaway is at worst case, if done right, the ROI is neutral, which means that all the value proposition flows directly to the end users.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's also then about the cost first, because we know we're under significant cost pressures at the moment with the economy and the like. It's then about the outcomes, the experience, right, Barb? Do you want to comment on your business case experience?
There's going to be different nuances to bring out, I would say, depending on the organizational appetite for change. If you are supporting here a rollout of a significant project, it's going to be very structured, and there's going to be potentially a commitment to do this end to end. I think often when we don't make a start and prove the value, then we're eternally caught in that position of not getting anywhere. So for me, I think that joining the dots to the business outcomes, which is we're going to talk here in terms of the clinician's experience and how digitization is being progressed in your organization. We do need to join the dots, which means that you actually have to engage with that workforce who are going to be impacted as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just a tech thing here. It very much steps across into that clinical workforce impact.
And I think it's a good sort of segue to the next one, which is, a classic sort of strategic outcome that we're hearing. Commonly we're obviously, we've briefed Farid around how dispersed the region is and how in terms of the population as well in those rural areas. So, this whole concept of digital equity comes up a lot as an example of one of those sort of outcomes that we want to deliver. What's your experience and, how would you approach this concept?
Unfortunately, not all of our end users and our locations are equal. And the way that I see VDI delivering a great outcome is that it simplifies the technology that has to be supported in a place other than where the technical resources are. When I mentioned in part one how consistency of experience is really important, and this technology platform enables that consistent experience or something very similar to, we can't account for national telco outages, but outside of that, the experience can be built to be very similar, whether they're in a remote or regional area. And it is an unfortunate reality that in rural areas and even more in remote, that having services unreliable, not working is just a fact of life. Nurses are certainly renowned for just getting the job done regardless, but the reality is that it can impact the quality of services and clinical safety because they are forced to work around because their technology isn't reliable.
Yeah. So I think, and that's a good point. Yeah, the reality is, if we don't consider those, if you do in your organisation, if you do have those rural and remote use cases, we need to consider them because there is actually potential for some safety issues. I mean, Farid, what about you? And you've obviously got a huge geographical area up there. Any comments?
That's this actually is one of the key parts of the value proposition behind VDI, in the sense that in areas where there is significant distance to kind of trained resources, those areas generally go underserved only because having technology out there becomes more and more expensive. And VDI really comes into the picture because you effectively are delivering a common, consistent experience, irrespective of the distance from the core of a typical network, right? We're seeing that play out in Canada in particular, somewhat of a similar scenario where there is a need to deliver equitable care to remote areas, oftentimes inaccessible other than by planes. And many of the provinces leverage VDI as a way to deliver the applications to the clinicians without having to situate expensive staff in these locations, and also worry about a disparity in terms of service and experience for the clinicians that are dealing with these remote areas, right? One of the things that we've seen over the last 10 or 12 years in the US in particular, as part of the whole pivot and transformation towards an electronic or digital care delivery, is that the the nature of the desktop environment, it has gotten quite complicated to the extent that you now have multiple applications out there that basically snap into place with the EMR at the center. We also see that from an operating system perspective, things have become a lot more complicated. Updates are much more significant. They're more frequent, and not having currency in terms of security updates can have disastrous outcomes, right? So it makes management of these remote operating system instances out there much more difficult, and therefore VDI circumvents all of that, because we effectively manage the image, the OS, the updates, the apps, all of those things centrally, and deliver them over a fairly lightweight protocol that can withstand different types of network quality, different latencies, different packet loss scenarios, and effectively deliver a consistent experience. So we see this as one of the hallmarks of VDI in terms of value.
And I think for it, some great points there. The other angle is, the reality is some of these locations do go offline sometimes. So that's sort of the elephant in the room. And you mentioned there was a fairly significant national outage, one of our telcos yesterday. The solution and the building blocks that we talked about in part one, and we'll discuss a bit more today, do give you that option to deploy a set of compute, but in the same way with a consistent infrastructure that it looks the same, it's perhaps just a smaller scale, that allows you to manage it. Even if your management layer is perhaps still hosted centrally, you can deploy everything there. We have around that. So
that's right. Yeah. And so just to add to that a little bit, we're also, as part of the evolution of technologies, we're seeing software-defined WAN technology also play a role in these kind of rural settings, where you effectively have multiple connectivity paths, including cellular, right? That augments their standard connectivity. So you effectively have resilience in terms of the actual network provider, right? And then you're able to then more or less fall back on a backup connectivity. So the notion of going completely dark is less and less frequent as long as you have redundancy in terms of uplinks. I have customers that effectively have multiple cellular connections, right? Different providers, one is Verizon, one is AT&T, in addition to their own, corporate connection. And you can aggregate all of these things with these technologies, and VDI works really well in that scenario as well. So that's So I think plenty of options around there. It also sort of brings us on to the next question around that hosting. I said, just drop some kit into that location. We know that's particularly difficult in healthcare. We know a lot of you have capacity challenges. It's hard to get the budget approval. Even putting that aside, it takes a long time to potentially get that kit in place. So we know a number of you have been either considering or actually moving into public cloud for certain workloads. I think the key point here to consider, if you are considering, do I go on-prem versus an Azure or an AWS, is think about where your data residency is. So if your apps and your data is going to continue to be hosted on-prem, at least for the foreseeable future, you might want to think about continuing to run down there. You might start to use public cloud for certain use cases. That's one of the themes of this webinar series, is thinking about your different use cases, your workflows. So a common one we're seeing here is, and it's quite easy, is you go, well, it's the corporate use cases, it's the non-clinical. Fareed, I know you've got some other ones that you come across. We're seeing increasing number of providers kind of dip their toe into this space, leveraging the cloud capabilities for use cases such as disaster recovery, where you effectively have a modest footprint, but it's set up in a way that you can increase capacity fairly quickly. We see use cases that are oriented around what unfortunately is very prevalent these days around ransomware, and they want to be effectively have an environment that has the capability of bringing them back online in the case of ransomware. So these are air gap environments, as an example. We also see this thing in the case of use cases where there are seasonal variations, whether you have uptick in contractors and offshore developers, all the way to anything that's seasonal lends itself to this, so that you don't have an infrastructure that's just there at the high watermark, but you only pay for the resources that you need when you need it. So
yeah, it feeds back into the business case, right? That DR one. We've been working with a number of customers very recently. Costs about 8,000 Australian a year to run that pilot light up in Azure, using a Horizon Cloud on Azure solution to give you that flexibility to pull in those use cases where appropriate. So definitely is there. The reality is that hybrid approach is probably going to be.
I think just suffice to say that it does need some detailed analysis, and we can work
with us on that. There's the cost modeling aspect. There's an operational angle of this. It's a different mindset. So let's finish up with this classic. So physical versus virtual, and I think we're talking here around particularly the Windows side of things. But Farid, which way would you lean? And this is a typical thing, right? Okay, we want to do this transformation, but then the exec says, "Well, we've got these PCs. Would we not just carry on with those?"
Yeah, this is really at the center of the conversation for sure, and this can be viewed from different lenses. There's a CFO lens, right? And then there's a CISO lens. And then, of course, there's a CIO lens to this, right? Maybe I can just kind of very quickly, put some color around that. From the CISO perspective, and security is top of mind pretty much everywhere these days, right? I'm sure it's no different over there. The CISOs are always concerned invariably about a very simple but kind of an unfortunate fact, which is at any given point in time, because every single PC is an independent instance of Windows operating system, and it needs to be patched appropriately over time. And they know that at any given point in time, there is more than zero number of PCs that are not patched properly. That's a given. And the problem is, these days, every single one of these could be a vector for an inbound vulnerability and exploits into the environment, right? So you could look at physical versus virtual from a CISO perspective to say virtual or VDI effectively guarantees zero drift. Right, and that, I call that nirvana for a CISO, because you're effectively saying every single time somebody starts a desktop, it is guaranteed to be a known, patched, pristine instance of Windows, right? So that carries with it a level of risk mitigation that is very significant. From a CFO perspective, go ahead.
So I think that's certainly that security angle is huge here. Bob, might just bring you in on this, just because you talked about simplified management earlier as well. It's probably another angle of
so probably just bridging a CFO and CIO lens. The cost of a thin client versus a thick client is what it comes down to in the business case. And if you try and keep a foot in both camps and go, well, we're going to implement VDI on top of thick clients, then the value isn't going to be realized out of your business case. So you do have to commit to what you're going to do. And where you're using virtual desktops with thin clients, for me, that is always the default, if possible, because you've got less to
All right, so hopefully that gives you some ideas. Obviously, like we said, we could probably spend a good hour on each of these topics, but thanks for the insights, guys. What we'll do now is move on to the best practice. So once you start going down this path, really, what are the considerations? And these are learnings that have been fed back for, well, actually not just our healthcare customers, but also, across the board where we've done huge transformation projects, 300,000 plus users, for instance, significant scale. And the first one really comes down to requirements gathering. Now, there's going to be a fair amount of, there's common sense in this, but we do see this as being key. In healthcare, we need to understand the clinical workforce impact. We want to make sure if you are coming from an existing virtualization platform, be it, perhaps with a competitive product, or it's just, much more legacy, or it's app publishing or something like that, this is the way we've always done it. Is not a requirement. This is a chance to do something differently. The stack works differently to competitors, for example. So really think about this. But it's important to engage the workforce as much as you can. And Farid, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, that's kind of captured with this with the overlay here. So healthcare. Having been, on the other side within healthcare IT myself for a number of years, it's deceptively complicated, right? And that complexity comes by way of different applications, and not just different apps, but a space that quite often has a lot of legacy applications, right? Different peripherals. It's a very peripheral centric space with multiple different types of peripherals that are in play in a clinical setting. Also has different clinical workflows, right? The notion of a shared endpoint where you have a device with clinicians coming in, spending a few minutes on it, and then just moving on, right? It's a rapid workflow. Efficiency is the name of the game, and you got to have a very fluent way by which you allow access. When you put all of these together, applications, peripherals, different workflows, it really calls for a good understanding of the requirements before any design is finalized.
So understanding users and workflows, as Farid's just said, there's a whole range of different things that go on. And in gathering requirements, there is no substitute for getting alongside those clinical workflows in their actual environment and working through what they do and how it's going to work. It's helpful to remember that clinical workforce are very well educated people, very opinionated, and they have, in their minds at least, a rationale about why they're doing things the way they are. And this does come back to, this is the way we've always done it. It's a balance of challenging that and helping to open up the possibilities where technology can introduce a different workflow. But you actually do have to spend time with them and take on board their feedback.
Cool, thanks, guys. And the related, in terms of the requirements, is requiring a product is not a requirement either. We want to talk about what's the requirement and what's the policy. So, for example, we hear a lot of, we want to use our existing master image or our existing SOE because it's got our 5 security tools in it, and that's what security says. and it's McAfee and it's all of this, all of these different products. We need to think about it from a policy perspective because, like I said earlier, the Horizon toolset gives you many different capabilities to perhaps remove those applications. So DLP is a classic one. You would typically have something that controls DLP on your physical PC. We've got controls within Horizon and Dynamic Environment Manager to do that. And if you can remove that security agent and use the inbuilt tools, you're going to free up resources, you're going to lower your footprint, and ultimately deliver a better experience. So I think for it, this was your quote. I think the point here is, don't pull along your legacy. As I said earlier, start from fresh, use our best practice, and you're going to get a better outcome.
Yeah. This is an important thing because sometimes there's a tendency to say, I don't want to change too many things. So even though I know it's legacy and it's not going to have a long future, I'm just going to carry that forward. And generally, those type of decisions end up compromising, whether it's capacity or performance or ultimately experience and cost. So if it needs to be there, it needs to be there for a good reason, and not just because that's how we've done it. And there are ways of dealing with legacy that are more efficient. So this is it requires some fresh thinking along the way for sure.
Yeah. And again, related to that is the number of times we come across customers who do not have a test environment is quite alarming. Do build a test environment early. The key here, though, Barb, I think you've done this in the past, is just making sure you start small but complete, right?
So this comes back to use cases. A good way to start is with a specific use case where you can prove the hypothesis, so to speak, and actually see what happens in the real world. Back to the previous statement there, this is the way we've always done it. Humans need time to comprehend how things that they work with, how the technology they work with is going to change the way that they approach things. And actually giving them something to work with is the only way to really surface the things that we haven't thought of yet. In a test environment as well, you need to have all those links into other systems that enable them to have a realistic experience, not just the core applications, but everything that they need to support the workflow that they're going to be working with. So complete is very important.
Yeah, I was going to say, Farid, that's your favorite phrase, complete, right?
Yeah. So a couple of observations here. One is when we say test, obviously there's technical test, but ultimately what we mean by test here is validating the assumptions and validating what we think would be an acceptable service from a user perspective, right? So in the complete part of it, to me, it's somewhat analogous to how they build ships and planes, right? If you want to build a new ship, a new design, you don't build a whole ship that big to see if it works or not. There are very well practiced techniques and technologies that allow you to build a small ship, but it's a ship all the same. It has all the characteristics of the big one, but you use that as a way to effectively validate. They do very similar things with planes. And I kind of see a direct analog here in the sense that we have to be careful that testing is not technical testing. I mean, VDI has been around for a very long time. There are millions of end users behind that service. So it's not testing to see if the bits work necessarily. It's really testing to validate. And when it comes to that, you have to validate something that's complete. Because if it's not, then what are you really validating?
And I think it also then means you can then take that building block, whether it's you build a new environment for the real use case, or it's part of the same platform. As you do then scale out, we need to be making sure we're baking in the telemetry tools and the monitoring tools from the start, so that when you get user one, I know the first 10 users, the first 100 users, you get them on, they're probably going to have a good experience, right? get that baseline measurement in, then when you get to 500 and you get to 1,000 and 5,000 and 10,000, you want to make sure that the experience for that first user is still as good as it was previously.
Yeah,
and you talked about baselines and consistency of experience last week. Yeah,
it's really important that before you start, you baseline what happens today, and then you continue to measure or re-baseline at various points throughout adoption, and then into the future as good hygiene as well.
Yeah. And for you approach this around this concept of build for, not just reporting. You need to make sure you can troubleshoot this thing.
Right. Yeah. So measuring is in this context very different from having data to report, or for instance having logs to analyze. Measure here means gather telemetry over time at a level of granularity that allows one to be able to look at the behavior of the environment holistically, whether it's on the compute side, on the storage side, on the network side, on the VDI pool side. I mean, what have you? It's really a holistic view across thousands of metrics, and then have this captured in such a way that the dashboards allow the operation staff to do root cause analysis on these kind of intermittent things that might happen. So it might be an anecdote from a clinician around a particular performance issue or a login time, or all the way to somebody saying that application wasn't performing right. The idea here is the real tough things to deal with are mostly intermittent, and the ability to do root cause analysis very succinctly needs to be built into these type of platforms right from the start.
And you mentioned a good point there as well, so there's absolutely the tooling and actual data analysis as part of this, but you also mentioned that anecdotal feedback from staff. So we've said it there around collect sentiment from staff. We have capabilities within the tool set to help gather that feedback if you want, or you create more of that feedback loop to certain stakeholders, because then you're getting how the people feel. Are they having these little issues, or that again, I like Barb's thing last week around the inconsistent experience. It's great that I get 10 seconds when I log on at 7 a.m, but it's really not very good when I get 5 minutes at 2 p.m. because everyone's on the system. So you sort of get a bit of both. And this feeds into this next one around things change. You need to be expecting that things will change. You're going to get some additional use cases that come along that you weren't aware of when you went in that planning stage. You can't plan for everything. So again, if you've got the telemetry and you've got the ability to collect that feedback and sort of make incremental changes, really what we're talking about here is making sure we have a modular approach so that you can adapt when needed. And I know, Farid, you like the Lego block approach.
Yeah, that's being an architect at heart, Lego blocks have this beautiful simplicity where you can put together variable shapes using fundamental building blocks, and it is no different. In this scenario, a Lego block could be a cluster of hosts with some characteristics. It could be a pool of desktops. It could be a pool with an image. The idea is let's design for something that lends itself to be put together in different forms to deliver different kind of workflows. And once that design is established, then stay with it, because future use cases will come along, and by virtue of reusing and applying these building blocks in different forms, then different workflows can be delivered without fundamentally changing the architecture.
Do you want to add anything to that?
I think under the next item that it really does feed into that. I think for me, moving from the left to the right here, it starts off in the analytics of it, and it moves through to the emotion of how are we building technology that people love using. And to to get from building the technology and then testing that out with the people, adapting it to how they want to use it, is a process that is a commitment to ongoing change and also being engaged with the right individuals in the organisation who can influence the, let's call it, digital transformation journey that is happening here. So I think we all have, I'm going to say, biases or ideas about what we think our users need. And when we actually test that out, and so do our users. I can think of examples where in one particular specialty, they were dead certain that they were going to use laptops on carts in a certain way. So we literally built an environment to do that. And then they realized, actually, that wasn't going to work. We want a fixed computer a fixed terminal at each chair in this instance. So, we really have to acknowledge that we're on a journey of discovery together with the clinicians that we're engaged with, and we need to stay engaged and open to making the changes and using technology that can adapt as well.
Fred, any pieces on that stakeholder advocacy?
You're right. So that was my biggest learning from my stints in healthcare IT, 7 years of it. Even though from one angle, this is about cost justification, making sure that there is proper ROIs and so on. Ultimately, this is not the success of these kind of programs doesn't come by virtue of viewing them as just new tech, right? This is fundamentally a new form of accessing your desktop, and it needs to be offered as a new service. And the new service would have a name, would have a brand, maybe a moniker. It has to be socialized. It has to be lifecycle managed. It has to be given the attention that a product would, as an example, right? Of course, that all comes at the behest of a number of stakeholders. And those stakeholders are not necessarily IT stakeholders. They are clinicians in the leadership position. There's a chief nursing officer, a CMIO, influential physicians, clinicians, and so on. So the whole thing needs to be viewed as a new innovation and a new service by IT, rather than just simply a new tech to deliver Windows in a different way.
Yeah, and so I think the takeaway here, if we summarize, we've covered a lot there, but really what we're talking about is starting small but complete. I think that's really important, making sure we're feeding in all those requirements. We understand what the current state is at the start, thinking in that modular approach, because it helps you just get delivering something, deliver the first use case, gather the feedback, and most importantly, engage your stakeholders. As you get that feedback and you get good comments, use the telemetry for your advertising. Like Farid said, this is about the product. A little plug for something that isn't in the product. This is just something we offer to our customers. You can go to that link there to our adoption kits. Marketing your service and taking those quotes and the feedback, and your log on times, your reconnect times are 5 seconds now, whereas they used to be 5 minutes, whatever the headlines are. Your cool service name. we won't try and
I'll
go on,
just
what was
throw
yours?
in one. So at the SAN it was called SANView.
Yeah. So it's not, VDI or your virtual desktop, it's a bit techy, what could it be? And so, go and use these adoption kits. There are posters in there. There are suggested schedules for things like email blasts to the different users. There's you can customize it with your logos. Many of our customers have taken that and then created their own websites and videos out of this as well to, again, drive the awareness. You do have to think about that these days. The other angle that we can help with, which is very much more of a custom engagement, is working with you to help engage your stakeholders, perhaps understand the current state, and put this in to really, again, advertise the service, or perhaps this would go as part of the business case.
So we really just threw this in to show in the context of the project that you're working with, we can actually pull together specific information about your own implementation, your own work environment, and express it in language that's going to be important to the clinical workforce or the specialty or the service that you're supporting. And in this instance, this value position actually was owned by the midwifery practice, and it's formed part of their strategy. From their perspective, it's not just about dollar savings, but about improving the daily life of their midwives who work out in the community. And this is something that we can do in the context of your own environment to support business cases, really, and to wrap it all together.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about this one was this was based on just saving 6 minutes for every shift. And the way the chief midwife spoke about this as they went and advertised, to all the different parts, was that the most valuable piece for her was that she might be able to sit down and have a coffee because she's on her feet for 12 hours a day. Interesting way of doing it.
And by the way, in many cases, the metrics these are very conservative on purpose for this customer. In many instances, it's really significant time saved per day that can be expressed in however it resonates best within your organisation.
This is, again, to sort of summarise where we've got to, this is also another example of starting small. So this is just, like Barb said, just for the midwifery practice. This was going to expand to many other departments in this organisation as well. But we built it complete, tested it, measured at the start, measured the end result, and created this. So let's wrap up with the recommended methodology, and I think there's a couple of things to mention here that build on what we've spoken about already. All of that best practice that we've just spoken about has formed, it's gone back into our methodologies within VMware of how we approach the deployments, and hopefully you're getting the idea at the moment. You have this idea of defining and activating and then iterating around your use cases and sort of adding optimizations as you go. So you build a gradually increasingly capable platform. The idea of this is, we talked about requirements gathering and getting your designs together, thinking about the way we're going to approach this. Prioritization would come as part of this. There's a level of technical difficulty. Either some of them are easy, some of them are more difficult. There's obviously the impact that it'll give to the clinicians. So you want to pick those and think about your roadmap around how you're going to deliver value. The fundamental piece of the activate stage, which is perhaps different from some of our previous recommendations, is you want to build all of your management layer in the first instance. So even if you don't have a use case at the start for something like app volumes, design the manager, make sure it's built, it gets it put in place, gets put in as part of the operational processes, because then as you iterate round, which is the next piece, once you start to bring on more and more use cases, more and more, there'll be more applications getting added, there'll be other requirements coming out. You then have all of the management components in place that you can start consuming immediately. We've seen many customers just start with, perhaps in the Horizon context, the unified access gateway and the connection server, and not done anything else. Then when they found a need to use something like app volumes or dynamic environment manager, they then had to go back to the design board. They've got to go through change requests. It delays the projects. So the point here, you build everything so it is there to consume, and you can then focus on the use case and the workflow in front of you. What you'll then find is there's opportunities to optimize as part of this. So perhaps in order to meet a deadline, perhaps to get off some aging hardware, for instance, you may have to pull some things across as they're needed. As we said earlier, make sure you're trying to start afresh as quickly as possible. But look at things like improving that. Things like the analytics to improve the experience, perhaps connections into ITSM systems, and expanding out. Farid, I know the people and processes one is something you sort of tackle as you go as well.
Yeah, that's that's an area where there has to be some very clear thinking around. The idea here is ultimately this is an end user compute service, right? And therefore, even though the backend technology is very, very different, the fundamentals of service delivery in terms of application packaging, image management, updates, change control, all of those things are things that have to be consistent. And if done right, this doesn't become a silo all to itself. Even though the technology is different, the service itself is still owned and delivered by the same team that currently owns the end user compute service, right? So the people and process is really important because, like I said, there's a tendency to think that, well, this is new tech, needs to be off to the side, and before long you realize that it's a separate operational silo, and in some ways that can get in the way of the overall economics of the project, but also from a service delivery perspective, you don't want to have multiple groups effectively delivering end user compute services, right? So that definitely is an area that deserves some additional thinking for sure.
Yeah. So, Farid, why is it important to approach it in this iterative or continuous phase delivery manner?
So the idea here is, how do I deliver something that is simple enough so that I can deliver it quickly, and yet high value that garners additional adoption, mind share, and overall momentum, right? That's the trick, the intersection of, how do I build the highest value in the shortest period of time, right? So this is an example of use cases that we see out there, and you'd find that starting from the left, that's an example of phase delivery. Oftentimes customers in healthcare basically say a large part of my Windows estate comprised of shared devices. They are effectively used as kiosks. Clinicians walk by, they backstep in, they do their thing, and they move on, right? But it's highly prevalent. Maybe 40 to 50% of the estate might actually be of this type. This typically lends itself to that notion of, it's a kiosk, well-defined, it's a known set of applications, a high value because clinicians depend on it, it's mission critical, and therefore with the right architecture, you can deliver that quickly. But the idea is, it would be hard to say, I'm going to deliver across all these use cases, and I'm going to have a pilot that does everything, right? Versus a scenario that says, I'm going to deal with the first one, right? Declare success, and then move forward into the next one and the next one and the next one. Because if the first one is done right, then the business, the clinicians basically say, all right, what else do you have for me, right? It's a positive conversation rather than a critical conversation with too many things in play.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's about reducing risk as well.
Yeah, I have a principle, which is that you can't ever deliver something that almost works. You have to be certain it actually works. And I see doing one thing, getting it right, and then going from there is the best way to build trust and get those users on board and make them want to adopt. Yeah. So there's always got to be, if you're asking people to change the way they work, there's got to be value in it for them, and testing out how you're going to achieve that case by case is definitely the way to do it with less risk, because we do see in healthcare when things fail, they can fail quite spectacularly, and taking that use case approach is definitely there's a higher probability we're going to succeed.
And don't forget about your support staff and the other people around it. They also gradually learn. They build a trust with them as well. So ultimately about delivering something really good. You get the feedback, you lower your risk, and you deliver value faster as well. All right, so that brings us to the end. We'll pause for if there's any questions. Again, please put them into the chat. Really today was to give you as many tips as we could, but we have just touched the surface of this. So hopefully you can see we could quite happily talk about this all day. If you do have more questions or you want to do more of a deep dive, I know we're working with a number of you now anyway, but if you want to have more of a detailed discussion with myself, Farid, and Barbara, please contact your account manager. We put a few sort of links around that. You will get a follow up with the video recording. Please give us your feedback if you'd like us. If there's any topics you felt we didn't cover or you want other topics being covered, please let us know. We'd love to hear your feedback. So we'll pause for any questions. We'll leave it open there. I don't know if Barbara, Farid, you want to give any closing words just while we're seeing if there are any questions.
I'm good.
I'll just kind of throw this in there that everything we've talked about is very well understood in terms of practice. We've had tremendous success in doing so across the board in multiple countries, in particular in the United States, as the whole healthcare transformation or digital healthcare kind of started here some 12, 13 years ago. So everything we've talked about is dead center in terms of viability, and done right. So this is unquestionably a successful journey.
Right, and I'll finish with that we want to build great tech and ultimately win the hearts and minds of our healthcare workers.
That's it. So thanks very much for joining, everyone. We're not seeing any questions, so appreciate you being on. Hopefully that's given you plenty of food for thought. As I say, we tried to give you as many tips as possible. Good luck on your healthcare transformation journeys.
Thank you.